She had a first-class ticket with her name on it, but the airline told her to move to the back. Why? Because she didn't look the part. What they didn't know was that she owned the airline's largest stakeholder fund. What would you do if you were publicly humiliated on a flight not because of what you said or did, but because of the color of your skin? What if the woman they pushed aside turned out to be one of the most powerful CEOs in the country? And what if, in just 5 minutes, she froze over $2 billion on grounded 152 flights and rewrote the rules for the entire aviation industry without ever raising her voice? This is a story of Serena Blake, a calm, brilliant, and underestimated black woman whose quiet resistance shattered a system built on silence. A woman who chose dignity over revenge and changed the sky forever. But the question that will haunt you is not what she did. It's why she had to do it at all. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the story that changed the way we fly. The airport was quieter than usual for a Friday morning. A slow fog pressed against the windows of Maple Run International, softening the edges of the tarmac and smudging the outline of distant planes like faded memories. Dr. Ayanna Cross moved with gentle certainty, her carry-on rolling behind her with the smooth rhythm of a woman who had taken this journey many times before. She wore a navy wool coat and soft leather shoes, her afro tucked beneath a slate-gray scarf. She didn't need a designer bag or heels that clicked with power to command presence. Her silence did the work. She paused just past security, near Gate 14B, and glanced at the digital display above. Flight 9201 to Berlin. On time, first-class boarding begins in 27 minutes. She breathed out, long and low. This gate had history, not just for the airline, for her. She used to stand here with her mother, waiting for shifts to end. The baggage handlers were often invisible to passengers, but Ayanna saw her mother's hands red from cold winters, her back stiff from heavy lifting, her smile still bright under the grime. She remembered being 8 years old, clutching a peanut butter sandwich and a second-hand book, watching rich travelers sip sparkling water behind the golden rope that guarded the first-class lounge. Her mother had leaned close and whispered something Ayanna never forgot. No matter what they tell you, baby, never lower your wings. You hear me. She heard. Ayanna found a seat by the window, her ticket tucked into the inside pocket of her coat. It was crisp and clean. Seat 1A, first class, full fare, no upgrade, no miles, just earned. She pulled out her tablet, tapped in her code, and reviewed her presentation. It was titled Autonomous Ethics and Predictive Airspace Design. That was the polished version. What it really meant was how do you stop AI from repeating the racism of the humans who built it. She had seen it happen subtle, algorithmic discrimination, minority-piloted charter flights given less favorable routes, airports ranking passenger queues by biased parameters. It wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was code written without enough eyes that understood its consequences. But the outcome was the same. People like her were delayed, rerouted, deprioritized, or ignored. Not anymore. Ayanna's company, Aerologic, had rewritten that narrative. They built Tier 4 airspace architecture, clean, efficient, and blind to race, gender, status, or nationality. It responded only to physics, wind, weather, and safety. A sky that treated all passengers equally. She was heading to Berlin to present the data an elegant spreadsheet with billions of dollars in savings and an even more powerful conclusion. Equity works. Her fingers hovered above the screen, but she didn't press play. Instead, she looked up, across the waiting area. A white man in a pale blue blazer was arguing with the gate agent. He pointed toward the plane, then toward himself, then back at his phone. Ayanna couldn't hear the words, but she recognized the energy. He was trying to change something. His seat, maybe, or an upgrade. She didn't think much of it. A woman sat down beside her, offered a quick smile, then turned her eyes to her Kindle. The morning moved on in tiny, polite silences. A voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now ready to begin pre-boarding for Flight 9201 to Berlin. Passengers needing assistance or traveling with young children may now proceed to the gate." Ayanna stood. She moved slowly. She was never in a rush to claim space, even now, with a first-class ticket. She had learned not to stride too quickly, lest someone think she didn't belong. At the gate, she handed her boarding pass to the attendant, who barely looked up. "Oh, Hu-chan, you hold on 1 second." Ma'am Ayanna paused. The scanner beeped again. The woman frowned. "Looks like there's been a change. Just one moment." A pit opened in her chest. Not fear, not surprise, just familiarity. The attendant called someone on a short radio, then turned back with an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, I'm afraid your seat has been reassigned. We had an equipment swap and some seats were shifted. You'll be in 32B now. Still a window seat?" Ayanna blinked once. "I purchased 1A. I understand. It's just a logistics thing. You'll still arrive at the same time." She laughed softly, as if this was all nothing. Ayanna nodded, slowly. "May I ask who's sitting in 1A now?" The attendant hesitated. "I'm not sure I can share that information." Ayanna turned to glance behind her. The man in the blue blazer was standing at the edge of the line, a boarding pass in hand. He smiled politely when she met his eyes, but he did not flinch. Of course, she thought. Of course. She took the new pass, walked to the gate, boarded the plane, and made her way to row 32 past the first-class seats with their blankets already folded, drinks already offered. She passed her Seether name printed on the manifest and coded into the system, a system she helped build. She sat in 32B, next to the restroom, across from a coughing toddler and a mother holding formula. She did not cry. She did not protest. Instead, she opened her laptop and began to write the first line of a new protocol. "They moved me from the seat I paid for, but they do not know who I am. They will." Ayanna stood in the narrow aisle for a moment longer than necessary. The gentle vibration of the aircraft beneath her feet barely noticeable beneath the tension in her chest. The flight attendant had not returned with a solution. No apology, no seat reassignment, no manager. Nothing but a tight smile and a polite excuse to move out of the way. Row 32. That was the assignment on her reprinted boarding pass. Not business class. Certainly not the seat she had paid for. She glanced toward the front of the plane, where a man in a tailored gray suit had casually taken the spot she had reserved. He was already sipping orange juice, scrolling through his phone as if nothing unusual had occurred. His comfort was bought with her dignity. Ayanna did not shout. She did not argue. She simply moved down the aisle, past row after row of reclining passengers who barely glanced up, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the small injustice unfolding in front of them. Her carry-on bag bumped lightly against seat edges as she passed, the wheels catching once on a backpack carelessly thrown into the aisle. She murmured a quiet sorry, even though it was not her fault. She had learned long ago that being calm was not only survival, it was strategy. When she reached row 32, she paused. The seat was already partially occupied by a young woman with earbuds in and a laptop open. Ayanna cleared her throat gently, and the woman looked up, then immediately scrambled to shift her belongings. "Oh, sorry. I thought no one was coming," she said, smiling with a hint of embarrassment. Ayanna nodded and forced a small smile. "No worries. Looks like I'm here now." She took her seat. It was narrow, the armrest pressing into her right side, the window cold against her left. Her knees touched the seat in front of her, and she adjusted carefully to avoid disturbing the person beside her. The hum of the plane's air vents filled the silence between them. Ayanna breathed in through her nose and out slowly through her mouth. She had trained herself to do that before every major speech, every negotiation, every moment where the world expected her to shrink. A child cried somewhere in the rear cabin. A flight attendant gave safety instructions up front, her voice professional but slightly rushed. Somewhere between rows 3 and 4, Ayanna's name had been erased. She was no longer the CEO with global speaking engagements and a patent in orbital aviation routing. She was a passenger in 32B. The absurdity of it made her laugh quietly, not out loud, but just enough that her shoulders lifted for a moment. The woman beside her turned and gave a curious glance. "Something funny?" she asked, taking one earbud out. Ayanna smiled softly. "Just a strange day. That's all." They sat in silence for a beat before the woman nodded and turned back to her laptop. Ayanna stared out the window as the plane began to taxi, the distant lights of the airport flickering against the glass. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, to the countless hours Ayanna Cross had spent wiping down food trays on red-eye flights just to keep Ayanna fed and dreaming. Her mother used to say, "You may not own the sky, but you sure as hell can shape it." Ayanna had done just that. And still, here she sat in 32B, not because she had failed, not because she did not belong, but because someone had looked at her and assumed she didn't. Her phone buzzed. She opened it discreetly. One message, Vincent Hale. "Let me know if you want to pull the pin. EtherGrid has full lock authority on this route." Ayanna stared at the message. Pull the pin. It would mean lock in the digital corridors used by this plane and every other aircraft in its altitude band. All it would take was her biometric confirmation. Not out of revenge, but to reset protocol. The reroute would trigger alerts. Pilots would have to explain. FAA would be notified. All data would lead back to the same system, the one she had co-designed. She locked the screen and slid the phone back into her coat pocket. Not yet. Instead, she pulled out her journal. The pages were filled with notes from the last month, speech drafts, diagrams, names of young engineers she had mentored, quotes from her mother. One page read, "Dignity is not a costume, it is architecture." Ayanna tapped her pen on the margin and began to write. She did not write about the injustice. She wrote about presence, the way it felt to sit in 32B with a straight spine and the full knowledge of who she was. She wrote about choosing silence when the world expected noise, about the restraint of a person who knew that stillness could be louder than outrage. She'd just written the words, You cannot evict a builder from her own sky when the seatbelt light blinked off. The woman beside her removed both earbuds this time. Do you fly a lot? Ayanna looked at her and considered the question. It was simple, small talk, but she answered truthfully. I fly enough to know when something is out of place. There was a pause. The woman smiled. I'm Clara, journalism student, Seattle U. Ayanna nodded. Ayanna, aerospace systems. Clara blinked. Oh, wow, that's impressive. Ayanna offered a soft smile. It depends on the day. The hum of the aircraft deepened as the plane ascended into the clouds. Ayanna closed her eyes. Her mind drifted again to Blue Core 9, to the last test she had run before leaving for the airport, to the hard drives encrypted under her alias. She wondered how many people on this plane understood that their safety was partially guided by a woman who had been asked to sit in economy after paying for first class. She reopened her phone. This time, she did not respond to Vincent. She opened her own system. Ethergrid interface, biometric login. Her thumbprint was all it took. The screen lit green. No action taken. She waited. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is wait, not forever, just long enough to remind them that stillness is not weakness. It is preparation. She tucked the phone away. The fight was not over. It had only just begun. The flight had leveled out above the clouds. Ayanna sat in seat 32B, her knees slightly pressed against the seat in front of her. The thin navy blanket barely covered her legs. Her laptop bag was wedged beneath her feet, cramping her movement. Still, her spine was straight and her face composed, even as her mind quietly raced. The cabin hummed with the soft lull of jet engines and scattered conversations. The curtain separating economy from first class remained firmly shut. Ayanna's phone buzzed. She hesitated. Phones were technically not allowed in the air, but hers wasn't connected to any cellular network. She had disabled all outgoing signals. Only encrypted alerts from Skybridge systems would be allowed through. She reached into her bag and glanced at the screen. The message was simple. Security breach detected on Apex 2 routing protocol. Confirm override authority. She exhaled slowly. Not now, she whispered to herself. She tapped once and opened the secured app. Her fingerprint unlocked it. A live grid of aircraft paths blinked into view. The Skybridge server, the one running the core automation for their long-haul partner routes, had been accessed without authorization. Her credentials were requested. She didn't need to guess where the breach had originated. She knew. The access came from the same airline operating this flight. The same company that had told her she didn't look like she belonged in first class. Ayanna's thumb hovered above the confirm button. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. She leaned back. Her mind replayed Lauren's voice from earlier, laced with politeness but sharp with judgment. The assumption, the smile, the removal, the curtain closing her out. For years, she'd built Skybridge to be invisible. Invisible systems, invisible labor, invisible minds behind the world's most sophisticated aviation infrastructure. And now she sat in row 32, invisible in the world she had helped create. She tapped Hold Protocol Activation. A confirmation screen appeared. It would freeze all long-haul routes using Apex 2 until manual verification occurred. One tap from her and 152 global flights would be rerouted, delayed, or grounded, not to cause chaos, but to ensure control was respected. She closed the app for now. One call would be enough if it came to that. A tap on her shoulder interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, miss," said a woman in her late 20s, standing in the aisle. "I think you dropped this." It was a notebook, not hers, but Ayanna accepted it with a soft "thank you." The woman lingered. "I just wanted to say, and I saw what happened earlier, that was out of line." Ayanna gave a quiet nod. "Thank you. I'm Ayanna. I work in systems design. I recognized you from the Skybridge conference last year. Your keynote changed how I work." Ayanna smiled, almost imperceptibly. She was used to being known quietly, in whispers and conference margins, never in headlines, never in the places that truly mattered. "I'm Ayanna," she said. "I know," Ayanna said softly. She crouched down slightly to avoid blocking the aisle. What they did, that wasn't about a seat, it was about erasure. "But I saw you, and I just want you to know," Ayanna gently placed a hand over Ayanna's. "It's all right. Thank you for seeing." Ayanna hesitated, then moved back toward her seat. Ayanna tucked the notebook into her bag and exhaled again. It wasn't about revenge, it was about presence, about refusing to be erased. Suddenly, the overhead intercom pinged. "Dr. Cross, if you are aboard, Captain Linwood requests a moment of your time. Please make your way to the front galley." Heads turned. Ayanna blinked. They used her title. She stood slowly, pulled her blazer around her shoulders, walked down the aisle. The curtain to first class was drawn aside, not by Lauren this time, but by a flight technician who nodded and gestured forward. The captain was waiting outside the cockpit. He extended a hand. "I'm Captain Linwood. I'm sorry to disturb you. I just received an alert from our technical team. Skybridge registered a conflict on our long-haul routing. Are you able to confirm protocol clearance?" Ayanna tilted her head. So now they needed her? "Yes," she said calmly, "but I'll need to speak directly with your navigation control. And I'd like to sit." The captain stepped aside. Of course, Lauren was standing nearby, her eyes wide. Captain Linwood turned. "Lauren, please escort Dr. Cross to 1A. Lauren didn't move at first. Then she stepped forward, eyes lowered. "This way, Dr. Cross." Ayanna walked behind her, calm, composed, inside. 1,000 thoughts wrestled. What happens when they realize you're the one with the codes? What happens when the world discovers that the woman they erased is the architect of their skies? She sat in 1A. The leather was soft, the air cooler. A flute of water appeared at her elbow without request. Lauren placed it down and said nothing. Ayanna looked out the window. Stillness. Then she took out her phone, opened the app again, confirmed override authority, and began to type. The seat was familiar, not because Ayanna had sat there before, but because she had designed it 7 years ago. She'd consulted on the ergonomics of this airline's first-class layout. Back when Skybridge was still negotiating its first major contract and Ayanna still believed that brilliance would be enough. Now, seated in 1A, she pressed her back into the memory foam. It responded to her exactly as it should. Precision was something she had always valued. Unlike human perception, it didn't misjudge. It didn't decide who did or didn't belong. A new attendant approached with a tablet and a hesitant smile. "Dr. Cross, would you prefer still or sparkling water?" "Still, thank you. Would you like the chef's special today or something lighter?" Ayanna met her eyes gently. "I'm not here for the menu." The attendant blinked, nodded. She walked away. Across the cabin, Lauren stood near the galley, speaking in low tones to another crew member. She didn't look toward Ayanna. She didn't need to. Her posture said everything. Tense, defensive, slightly ashamed, but not yet changed. Ayanna turned to the window. Sky as far as the eye could see, her reflection faint in the glass. She thought of her mother, of the quiet lessons passed down in the kitchen. Never raise your voice. Let your mind speak for you. There will be rooms you enter where no one will believe you belong. Sit anyway. Ayanna had sat all her life, at universities that barely tolerated her brilliance, in boardrooms that mispronounced her name, on panels where her ideas were repeated by men with louder voices, and now, here, in the very cabin she had helped make possible, the intercom clicked again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 36,000 feet, with a slight tailwind that should get us into Boston 10 minutes early. We'd also like to extend a warm acknowledgement to Dr. Ayanna Cross, one of the leading minds behind the navigation system ensuring your safe travel today. A pause, and a thank you, Dr. Cross, for taking a moment to assist our team mid-flight. It is an honor to have you aboard. The cabin buzzed faintly. People glanced toward first class. One or two applauded. Ayanna kept her hands in her lap. She didn't need applause. She needed respect to arrive on time, not 10 minutes early after a mistake. Lauren stepped forward, her voice low. Dr. Cross. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I thought Ayanna's eyes met hers. You thought I didn't belong. Lauren opened her mouth, but no words came. Ayanna continued, her voice even. You looked at me. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify. You didn't wonder why someone might book a first-class seat with an African name and a quiet expression. You simply removed me. Lauren nodded slowly. You're right. I judged, and I was wrong. Ayanna leaned back. Wrong isn't enough. Lauren swallowed. She stepped back, a little straighter now. You're right again. She turned and walked away, not quickly, but not slowly either, as if knowing that walking away was the only thing she could do with dignity still intact. Ayanna watched her go, then closed her eyes. The weight of the interaction pressed lightly against her chest. It wasn't hatred that hurt the most. It was the familiarity. She had lived this scene before. Different players, different setting, same unspoken message. You are not the one we expected. She reached into her carry-on and removed a small leather-bound journal. It was old, the edges worn, the ink faded. Inside were notes from her early days at Skybridge, pages of flight path schematics, fuel efficiency estimates, protocol hierarchies, but on the last few pages, something softer, letters to herself, a reminder of why she built all this. You are not building this to prove them wrong. You are building it to make the sky safer for everyone, even the ones who won't see you coming. Ayanna read it slowly, then let the book rest in her lap. Outside, the clouds shifted, the late afternoon light softened, somewhere far below. Someone would look up and see the white streak of their aircraft across the blue. They would never know the woman behind it. She reached for her phone again, typed a single line into the override system, standby protocol initiated, awaiting pilot confirmation for deactivation. It was a quiet message, but a powerful one. A reminder to the airline that their control existed on borrowed grace. A few seconds later, the cockpit messaged back, acknowledged, standing by. It wasn't defiance, it was demonstration. That real power was quiet, measured, purposeful. Another ding. A passenger from economy approached, hesitating beside her seat. "Excuse me, Dr. Cross." Ayanna turned gently. The woman was in her 50s, her skin deep brown, her eyes uncertain. "I just wanted to say thank you for existing, for being where you are. I saw what happened, and I've been you. I still am you." Ayanna smiled softly. "Then sit, take this moment with me." The woman's face lit with something unspoken. She sat in the open seat beside her. Just for a moment. Two women. One moment. No raised voices, no demands, just presence. That was what they never expected. Ayanna turned back to the window, the quiet weight of solidarity beside her. The world kept flying forward. But now, so did she. Ayanna didn't sleep. She sat still, hands resting gently on her lap, her eyes tracing the horizon through the oval window as dusk deepened into night. Cities blinked on below them like constellations flipped upside down. Small pinpricks of light scattered across the earth. The world looked so peaceful from up here, like nothing had ever gone wrong. But Ayanna knew better. Her mind drifted not just to the seat incident or Lauren's apology, but to everything that came before this flight, before the polished aircraft, before Skybridge became a name whispered across aerospace think tanks and military briefings, before the headlines and Forbes list features. Before all of that, there had been silence and abasement. She was 26, working 2 jobs, one teaching assistantship in aerospace systems at the University of Chicago, the other, overnight coding work for a freight logistics company too cheap to hire in-house. Her apartment smelled like burnt solder and instant coffee, but on her desk sat the beginnings of Skybridge. Not the company. The code, the algorithm she built by hand, line after line, sometimes crying as she typed because her hands ached and she couldn't afford ergonomic anything. She had named the first draft simply Alix, not for anyone in particular, but because it sounded strong, unapologetic, like it knew what it was doing even when no one else believed it. A noise pulled her back to the present. Ayanna looked up. The cabin was dark now, lit only by soft amber strips and the occasional reading light. Most of the passengers had fallen asleep. The woman from economy who had sat beside her earlier had returned to her seat, but she'd left a small note tucked under the water glass. "Thank you for being visible. You reminded me I'm not invisible." Ayanna folded the note gently, then placed it in her journal. She'd add it to the collection. Hundreds of small messages, tucked between engineering schematics and budget drafts. Notes from interns, old classmates, young girls who saw her on panels and wrote afterward, "I want to do what you do. I didn't know we could." Ayanna smiled quietly at the memory of one in particular. 11-year-old Malia, who had stopped her after a conference and asked if black women were allowed to build planes. Not could, but were allowed. As if brilliance came with gate permissions, as if genius had borders. Ayanna had knelt to her level and said, "Not only are you allowed, but one day, someone like you will build a sky that doesn't ask permission anymore." The sky, that was the root of it all. Her father had been a meteorologist, but never made much of it. Just a quiet man with a quiet passion, who took her to weather towers on weekends and let her press buttons no one else was allowed to touch. He died before she turned 16, A heart attack, fast, cruel. He never saw what she built, never heard about Skybridge, never knew that she'd chosen the sky as her battlefield because it was the one place where nothing stood still. Everything moved forward, even the air. Ayanna breathed in, held it, let it go slowly. A vibration buzzed from her phone. She reached for it. Message from Kira Jameson. "You good? Just saw the tweet. Do you want me to move?" Ayanna stared at the screen. Kira, her co-founder, best friend since undergrad, the only person who knew Ayanna better than her own reflection. Kira had been tracking the flight's social activity, clearly, and saw the viral post beginning to take shape. Lauren's removal of Ayanna hadn't gone unnoticed. A businessman in row 3 had captured the confrontation, uploaded it with a caption that read simply, "She was calm." They weren't. Ayanna's name wasn't even tagged at first, but someone recognized her, and the internet filled in the blanks. Not only was she calm, she was the architect of the navigation system, the very one keeping the plane airborne. Ayanna tapped a response. "Stay seated. Let them find you when it lands. We've got leverage now." Another ping. "You want me to call the board?" Ayanna hesitated. She looked out the window again. The clouds were thicker now, the lights below dimmer. It was that middle stretch of night where everything feels suspended, not just in air, but in meaning. She typed slowly, "No, not yet. This needs to breathe. Let it sting. Then we strike." She closed the screen. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. For too long, people like her had been forced to explain, soften, justify. Every board meeting began with a smile. Every pitch deck had to prove worth before brilliance. Every no carried the undertone of "not now," "maybe later," "maybe when you look more like us." She remembered one pitch vividly. 3 years ago, a European investment group. She and Kira had flown overnight, nervous but prepared. 38 slides, rehearsed answers. Data simulations so clean they practically sang. And still, the room had asked her if she was the assistant. Even after she began speaking, one man interrupted her 5 times. Finally, Kira had stood and said, "If the only voice you trust is your own, why are we even here?" The deal fell through, but so did the mask. From then on, Ayanna stopped softening herself. She didn't need to be smaller for someone else's comfort. This flight had just reminded her of that again. She looked across the aisle. Lauren was standing again, this time helping an elderly man retrieve medication from an overhead compartment. Her face looked different now, less polished, more real, the kind of look people wear after they've been forced to reckon with their assumptions. Ayanna felt no satisfaction in that, only a kind of sorrow. She didn't want Lauren to suffer. She wanted Lauren to see. To see that respect wasn't about titles or uniforms or race-neutral politeness. It was about reflex. What someone did the moment they believed no one would notice. Ayanna leaned back and closed her eyes. She didn't need sleep. She needed strategy. Because when this plane landed, the real work would begin. Not in conference rooms or headlines, but in policy, in protocol, in permanence. The sky had always been her canvas. Now it would be her courtroom, and she would paint every truth she knew until there was no more room for shadows. The landing gear hummed beneath their feet. Ayanna sat still, spine straight as the aircraft descended through thick layers of gray dawn. The city below Boston, quiet but alert, stretched out like a secret waiting to be told. The wheels touched down with a heavy kiss, the aircraft slowing to a whisper as the pilot welcomed them to Logan International. No one clapped, no one cheered. It was too early, too tense, too filled with unspoken tension. Ayanna reached for her leather satchel slowly. Her fingers lingered over the zipper, not out of indecision, but out of preparation. She had landed many times before in this city, for contracts, conferences, government briefings, but this arrival felt different, like history was waiting at Gate 17B, not with fanfare, but with folded arms and questions. Lauren stood near the front again, hands clasped in professional readiness. Her voice, clearer now, asked passengers to disembark in sequence. She did not look at Ayanna. Perhaps she didn't dare. Perhaps she did not know if she was allowed. Ayanna rose. She waited for her row to clear, then stepped into the aisle. There was no announcement, no camera, no escort, and yet the energy around her shifted. Someone on her left murmured, "Thank you." Another handed her a handwritten note. A man with graying hair and business class gently touched her shoulder and nodded. Wordless affirmation, quiet solidarity. The viral video had spread faster than she expected. Overnight, just 1 hour after takeoff. Her face had circled across LinkedIn, Twitter, and TikTok. She had not spoken a word in it, just stood still, removed from her rightful seat before taking the seat assigned. But silence, in the right hands, becomes thunder. By the time her feet touched the terminal floor, her name was trending at number 3 nationwide. She walked toward the arrival area alone. The crowd thinned around her. Some people stared. Others averted their gaze, unsure whether to smile or apologize. It was not fame that followed her. It was discomfort. She carried a mirror now, and no one enjoys looking into a mirror too long. Kira was waiting at the security rope. Black coat, sharp bob haircut, and a look on her face that said she had not slept either. Ayanna stepped forward. Kira hugged her without a word. Only when they pulled apart did Kira speak. "You want the good news or the bad news first?" Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "Neither. Just the truth." Kira handed her a phone. The screen was filled with messages from news anchors, from civil rights organizations, from allies, from opportunists. 3 legal teams had already offered to represent her. 5 corporate diversity execs had released generic apologies preemptively, hoping she wasn't talking about their airline. And buried in the feed was a message from someone unexpected. U.S. Transportation Secretary. "We are monitoring the situation closely. If Dr. Cross is willing, we'd like to open formal dialogue. This incident raises critical questions." Ayanna blinked, and the airline Kira nodded toward the news crawl on the nearby terminal screen. A press conference had already begun. The Skylink's CEO stood stiffly before a podium, reading from a statement. "We take these allegations seriously. While we are still gathering the facts, we have initiated a full internal review. The flight attendant in question has been placed on leave. We are reaching out directly to Dr. Ayanna Cross to extend our deepest regrets." Ayanna studied the screen. The CEO's voice was polished but empty. His eyes darted between lines on the page, and something else a shift in tone. Not just regret, fear. Skylinks didn't just wrong a passenger. They wronged their own architect. Kira's voice cut in softly. "They didn't know you were the one who built their guidance system. They just thought you were another black woman in the wrong seat." Ayanna exhaled, long and slow, and now they do. Kira nodded, and so does everyone else. They walked in silence toward the private SUV waiting at the curb, a quiet vehicle, no logos, no press tags, but Ayanna's presence now turned heads without effort. A teenager stopped mid-step to point her out to her father. An airport janitor removed his cap as she passed, not because she was famous, but because she stood for something larger than herself. In the back seat of the SUV, Ayanna pulled out her tablet. She opened a folder labeled Polaris, the name of their internal ethics initiative, one they had proposed a year ago to multiple airlines, a project focused on identifying and eliminating unconscious bias in high-altitude environments. No one had adopted it until now. She turned to Kira. "We launch it, today, with or without them." Kira didn't blink. "You sure you want to lead this charge?" Ayanna turned to the window. "I didn't board that plane to make a statement. I boarded it because I earned that seat. But if the world insists on turning it into a story, then we get to decide what kind." Kira smiled, a half-smile, the kind that meant battle was coming, but at least they were ready. What's first? Ayanna tapped her screen. A letter to every aerospace CEO, every board member, every policy head. We give them the data, the vision, the warning, and if they don't listen, Ayanna closed the tablet, then they'll learn like Skylynx is learning, in public. The vehicle rolled past the terminal exit. Behind them, the airport was waking up. Flights resumed. People hurried toward gates. Nothing looked different, but Ayanna knew better. The sky may have looked the same, but its silence would never be quiet again. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft cruised over Missouri. Outside, stars shimmered beyond the clouds, but inside the cabin of Flight 718 a storm had quietly begun. Serena Blake sat upright, her posture a picture of poise, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. The overhead announcement had just confirmed what she suspected. They were skipping the in-flight dinner service for first class. She had not eaten since her morning coffee and apple. Across the aisle, the man in 2A, Gregory Langston, was already dozing, a half glass of scotch on his tray. He had eaten. Of course, he had. The flight attendant had brought him a steak dinner 10 minutes after takeoff. Serena turned to glance at Mia, still awake and scribbling notes in her legal pad. The younger woman caught her look and offered a weary smile. "You okay?" she mouthed silently. Serena nodded, even though the truth was no. She wasn't okay. Not after being humiliated in front of dozens of passengers. Not after being addressed like an intruder in a space she had every right to occupy. And not after being served last, ignored, and dismissed as if she had no significance at all. She closed her eyes. A wave of emotion welled up. She tried to breathe through it, the anger, the sorrow, the weight of all the moments just like this one that had happened quietly, politely, always in the shadows. She was a billionaire, the founder of Ethereal Core Technologies. She had testified before Congress. She had built scholarships and infrastructure and hospitals. Yet tonight, she'd still been just another black woman to a crew that had already decided she didn't belong. Her fingers reached for her phone. Not yet. Wait. She knew the impulse. Retaliate, push back, take control. But she had learned, painfully and over time, that power used without restraint was just a mirror of the same oppression she fought against. No, there had to be another way, one that struck deeper, one that resonated, one that would shift culture, not just punish personnel, but how her thoughts were interrupted by the click of polished shoes. The flight attendant Amelia approached with a tray of drinks. She stopped beside Serena's seat, looking slightly annoyed. "I'm sorry, we're out of meals. Would you like peanuts?" she asked flatly. Serena looked at her, not a shred of apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened earlier, no awareness, or worse, complete indifference. Peanuts, for a first-class fare. She took them. "Thank you," she replied softly. The attendant paused for a second, then walked away. Serena opened the packet slowly and poured the salty contents into her palm. She stared at them, the tiny things, tasteless, dry, mocking somehow. "Do you want to make the call?" Mia whispered. Serena didn't answer. Her mind was no longer on the peanuts or the scotch or the meal she didn't get. It was on the weight of silence, the cost of being composed, the exhaustion of constantly taking the high road when the low road never paid a toll. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "They'll never see you coming if you walk like you already belong." He was gone now, but his lessons had built her. He had taught her how to stand with dignity when people tried to shrink her. He had taught her never to become the storm, but to understand it, harness it. She opened her phone. No cell signal, but the onboard Wi-Fi still worked. With 3 gestures, she entered her encrypted access. She opened the Raven protocol, a system her company had designed but never intended to use, not unless there was a real breach of trust by one of their travel partners. Raven was built as a silent mechanism for accountability. It monitored flights booked through Ethereal Core's employee benefit programs. It cross-referenced staff conduct reports, passenger data, and facial recognition patterns to detect discriminatory behavior and training lapses. It had been a fail-safe, an unused tool, until now. Her thumb hovered. "Serena," Mia said quietly, "you don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself the right to be seen. Fully." Serena looked out the window for a long time. The clouds below glowed softly under the moonlight. Somewhere beneath them, thousands of families prepared for sleep. Somewhere in a corner office, another black girl might be trying to lead, to rise but facing these same slights, these same silent cuts. She tapped the button. The screen shifted. Raven protocol activated. Serena exhaled. Far beneath the aircraft, in a locked room in a San Francisco server center, systems began blinking to life. Alerts were sent to the Office of Ethical Oversight, notifications queued for FAA liaisons, compliance monitors, and the legal departments of 2 global carriers. In 5 minutes, 152 flights booked through the Ethereal Core Trust Fund's platinum routes were flagged for review, and $2.1 billion in partnership renewals paused. Serena leaned back and closed her eyes. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of being gracious in rooms that gave her no grace. Mia watched the process unfold in real time on her screen, her expression shifting from shock to quiet awe. You just did more in 30 seconds than most people do in 30 years. Serena didn't reply. She didn't need to. The cabin continued in its hush, but beneath the silence, a reckoning had begun, one that wasn't loud, but would echo, not in rage, but in reform. And maybe, just maybe, that was more powerful than any confrontation could ever be. The plane hummed softly, gliding effortlessly through the dark. At 38,000 feet, most of the cabin had fallen asleep. Dim blue lights flickered along the aisle. First class had grown still, like a suspended breath. Serena Blake remained awake, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest, her eyes watching the clouds beyond the glass. But her mind was far below. The activation of Raven Protocol had been silent, clinical, efficient. It had required no outburst, no announcement, only a calm decision. Yet the weight of that choice pressed against her now. She turned toward Mia, who was quietly reviewing documents on her tablet. Mia sensed her gaze and looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you regret it?" Serena hesitated. That question had no easy answer. No, she did not regret defending her dignity, but something inside her still wrestled with the cost. Not just the business implications or the media fallout that would inevitably come. It was the deeper struggle, the moral one. "I don't regret the truth," she replied eventually, "but sometimes I wish the truth didn't always have to cut so deep to be heard." Mia nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have to teach a lesson every time you sit down." Serena offered a faint smile. "That would be nice." From the far end of the cabin, a different kind of movement stirred. Amelia, the flight attendant, reappeared. She was walking slower now, her confident stride replaced by something tighter. She paused near seat 2A, where Gregory Langston now slept, reclined fully with a blanket tucked under his chin. Then she turned toward Serena. For a moment, she just stood there, not speaking, not moving. Then, finally, she approached. "Miss Blake," she said, her tone softer than before. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I wasn't aware of certain details earlier. I may have come across as—" She trailed off. Serena said nothing at first. She simply studied the woman. Amelia's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Her face had lost some of its performative polish. She was uncomfortable, not rehearsed, maybe even sincere. "Are you sorry for how you treated me, or sorry that someone noticed?" Serena asked quietly. Amelia blinked. I suppose both. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Serena looked down at the blanket folded in her lap. "That's the thing. Most of it isn't meant. That's why it's so exhausting. Intent doesn't soften the impact." Amelia swallowed. "I understand. I really do." "No," Serena said, still gently. "You don't. But maybe one day you will. Maybe one day you'll look at a passenger and not assume. Maybe you'll remember this moment and realize dignity shouldn't require credentials." The silence between them lingered. Then Serena added, "You don't need to feel ashamed. You need to do better. That's enough for now." Amelia nodded stiffly and walked away, her posture slightly bent. It wasn't victory. It wasn't vindication. But it was something else. A seed. One that might grow. Mia leaned over. You could have dressed her down. Publicly. Serena shook her head. "I'm not interested in humiliation. I'm interested in evolution." Behind them, a few seats stirred. A couple in the row behind first class had noticed the exchange. Whispers passed between them. It had begun. Not the fallout. Not yet. But the shift. The conversation. The questions people ask quietly in their heads before the headlines arrive. Serena leaned back and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind spun through past memories. Times when she was 25 and still pitching ideas to rooms full of men who interrupted her. Times when she had boarded planes with the same boarding pass as her assistant, only to watch the crew greet the assistant and ignore her. Every slight, every micro-decision, every small erasure. They returned like echoes. And then another memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in years. She was 10 years old, flying alone for the first time to visit her grandmother in Savannah. Her mother had walked her to the gate and kissed her forehead. Remember who you are, baby, no matter how they treat you. On that flight, a white woman had scolded her for touching the first-class curtain when she tried to use the restroom. This is not your section, the woman had said, and Serena, young and unsure, had apologized. She remembered sitting back down, blinking away tears, holding her little backpack tightly, that same feeling, that same shame. And now she was the woman in first class, not because someone let her in, because she built the door. She opened her eyes again. The cabin lights flickered once more. Somewhere, turbulence gently nudged the aircraft, but she was steady now. Mia stirred beside her. How long until they notice? Serena shrugged. By the time we land, the boardrooms will already be scrambling. The systems were designed to trip every compliance trigger simultaneously. The media won't even be the first to know. Good, Mia said. They should have to explain themselves before they can defend themselves. Exactly, Serena replied. Let the silence make them sweat. In the cockpit, the pilot was already receiving encrypted communications. Nothing alarming yet, but the corporate liaison for the airline was flagged. A high-level meeting had been scheduled without explanation. The system knew what it was doing. It followed protocols that protected passengers from discrimination as part of a larger corporate equity mandate. Serena had written most of that policy herself. It wasn't revenge, it was resilience with structure. She picked up her journal from the seat pocket and opened it. Her handwriting was small, elegant. She wrote without pausing. You are not allowed to disappear into quiet just because you are tired. You are allowed to rest, but not to vanish. We cannot afford your silence. When she closed the journal, she felt a little lighter. She looked over at Mia. Get some sleep. We have a press wall waiting in the morning. Mia smiled wryly. With cameras and questions and probably one very confused CEO, probably, they both chuckled. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten, a soft line of indigo forming on the horizon. Dawn was coming, the beginning of a new day. And maybe, for someone else flying somewhere else, the beginning of a different kind of flight. One where they didn't have to prove they belonged. Not because the world had changed, but because someone like Serena Blake had decided it was time to push the sky a little wider. The morning sun spilled across the tarmac like honey as Flight 788 touched down at JFK. Passengers stirred from slumber, rubbing their eyes, stretching, returning to a world that felt slightly changed from the one they had left behind. For Serena Blake, the moment the tires kissed the runway, the real turbulence began. Her phone, once silent under flight mode, buzzed with a storm of encrypted alerts, redacted pings from her CTO, 3 missed calls from her firm's legal division, and a short message from her board chair. We're with you, fully. That message meant more than anyone could see from the outside. Mia leaned over from her seat. It's already started, hasn't it? Serena nodded without looking up. Raven's reach was faster than gossip. Overnight, it had blocked access to critical infrastructure across 3 aviation partners. Suspended licensing to a logistics AI software embedded in 28 airlines, and frozen internal accounts flagged in the equity monitoring system. Nothing crashed, but everything stalled, quietly, efficiently, like someone had unplugged the entire network from the inside. What scared them most wasn't what Serena said, It was what she could do without saying a word. As passengers began retrieving their belongings, an oddly formal silence settled in first class. Some people were aware, others were only just catching up on the headlines blaring from their phones. One man glanced toward Serena, then quickly looked away. Another woman gently ushered her child back from where they had wandered near Serena's seat, like proximity might invite scrutiny. But Serena remained still. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York City. We'll be taxiing shortly. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of the crew, thank you for choosing us." There was a pause, and to Miss Blake, the captain added in a more personal tone, "Thank you for flying with us. Your presence has been noted and appreciated." Serena blinked. Mia raised an eyebrow. "Noted," Mia whispered. "That's new." "Noted means they're bracing for impact," Serena said. As they disembarked, no crew member asked Serena to step aside. No one redirected her. This time, there was no question where she belonged. But the outside world waited with sharp teeth and flashing lights. At the end of the jet bridge, Serena and Mia stepped into a narrow corridor where two security personnel in dark suits stood quietly. Behind them, a private exit door. The taller of the two men greeted Serena. "Miss Blake, we've been instructed to escort you to your press route. Do you wish to go through the standard gate or prefer a private terminal?" Serena glanced toward the other end of the corridor. Through the glass, she could already see the swarm of cameras and reporters beginning to form. "Let them see," she said. 10 minutes later, Serena stepped into the terminal. The air was thick with questions. Flashes snapped like strobe lights. Microphones shoved forward like weapons. But Serena did not flinch. Her walk was steady, controlled, not cold, but deliberate. Mia stood at her side, not in front of her. That, too, was deliberate. A reporter from Channel 6 was the first to speak. "Miss Blake, can you confirm whether Raven Protocol was activated mid-flight?" Another from a tech blog shouted, "Did you really shut down over $2 billion in active systems with one call? Was this retaliation? Are you planning to sue the airline? Did they try to offer you a settlement? How did it feel to be mistaken for staff?" The questions blended, tangled over one another. Serena stopped walking. She didn't need a podium. Her silence was already louder than their noise. She raised one hand slightly, not to hush, but to hold the moment still. Then she spoke. "What happened on that flight isn't new. It isn't rare. It isn't even surprising." She looked directly at the camera. "But that doesn't mean it should be accepted. I was not the first black woman to be mistaken for someone who does not belong in the seat she paid for. I will not be the last. What happened to me was not personal. It was systemic. And it is precisely because it was systemic that I chose not to respond with anger, but with policy." She paused, letting the words settle. "I did not shut down flights. I activated accountability systems that the industry already agreed to. I did not embarrass anyone. I exposed something that embarrasses all of us. I did not ask to become a symbol. I asked to sit in my assigned seat." Someone asked, "Will you be pressing charges?" Serena replied, "I don't need to press charges. I press change. And I will continue to press it until the door stays open for those coming after me." Another reporter called out, "What's next?" Serena met the question with the calm she had earned over years of being doubted, dismissed, and disrespected. What's next is that every major airline in the United States is now on notice. Our licenses, our data, our tech infrastructure. These are not just services. They are systems built with purpose. That purpose must now align with equity, and if it does not, we will stop building. The crowd went quiet. Even the flashbulbs slowed. Behind Serena, Mia could see it. The shift, the recalibration. What had started as a quiet insult had grown into something else. Not vengeance, not virality, but visibility. Serena finished simply. No seat is too expensive for respect. She turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, social media exploded. The hashtag .seat2a began trending globally. Within the hour, the airline's CEO issued a formal apology and stepped down from the board of 3 diversity-focused nonprofits. By noon, at least 4 major carriers announced emergency audits of their in-flight training programs. But for Serena, the real victory was smaller. She boarded that flight alone. She left it seen, and that changed everything. Serena Blake did not go home. Instead, she went to Harlem. Not the polished, investor-laced Harlem with rooftop lounges and gluten-free bakeries. She went to the part of Harlem where the paint peeled and the corner bodegas still knew your grandmother's name. She needed grounding, not media, not meetings, just clarity. She left the black car 2 streets down, traded her heels for the flats Mia kept insisting she carry in her bag, and walked past the old library, the church steps where she once studied for her GMAT, the park bench where she used to take conference calls while shielding her cracked iPhone screen from the wind. Every step stripped away a layer of boardroom polish until she stood once again as the woman she had built herself into. Not to be palatable, but to be undeniable. The building she stopped in front of leaned to the left like it was tired of standing. She buzzed twice. An elderly voice came over the speaker. "Who is it?" "It's me, Serena." A pause. Then the door buzzed open. She climbed the stairs slowly. 1 flight, then another. The apartment smelled of cinnamon, liniment, and lemon furniture polish. Same as it always had. Her Aunt Laverne stood at the door in a faded housecoat, eyebrows raised. "Look at you. Stormed the skies and still remembered where your roots are." Serena hugged her tightly. Aunt Laverne hadn't watched the news. She never did. But she knew when her niece's spirit was loud, even when her voice wasn't. They sat in the kitchen. Serena watched as Laverne stirred honey into a chipped mug of chamomile. "You look tired, baby. Not the tired from travel, the tired from proving you still belong in spaces you already built." Serena stared at the steam rising from her cup. She didn't answer. Not right away. They made me feel invisible. Again, like I was just in the way. Even after all of this, Laverne smiled softly, but her eyes held the kind of fire only time can season. "Let me tell you something you already know but need to hear out loud. You were never invisible. They were just too small to see the size of your presence." Serena's throat tightened, not from sadness, from truth. She sipped the tea, let it sit on her tongue. Then, slowly, she unfolded the letter. It was handwritten, the penmanship neat but unsure. It had been slid under her door while she was in the air. No name, just 1 line at the bottom. From someone who saw you before, they told you not to be seen. The letter read, "Dear Ms. Blake, you don't know me. I was in economy. Row 34. My daughter had just spilled juice on her shirt, and I was trying to get the flight attendant's attention when you walked by. You had on that deep blue dress." My daughter looked up and whispered, "Mama, she looks like a real queen. I watched what they did to you, how they talked to you like you didn't deserve to be there. I saw your jaw tighten. I saw you sit straight anyway. I just wanted you to know she noticed. She's 6, and now she thinks queens don't need thrones. They just sit where they want and make it theirs. Thank you." Serena's hands trembled as she folded the paper again, not because it hurt, but because it healed. She handed the letter to Laverne, who read it quietly and nodded. "That's your legacy, baby. Not the billions, not the tech, not the press, but the quiet correction of what little girls are taught to expect." They sat in silence a while longer. Serena's phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Another buzz, then a third. "Mia." She stepped into the hallway and answered. "Hey, I know you needed time," Mia began, "but something's come up. You should see this." Serena sighed. "Is it legal? It's personal, kind of both." Mia texted her a link. Serena opened it, a video, grainy, probably from someone's phone. It had already been viewed over 7 million times. It showed a white woman, clearly flustered, speaking into a camera. "I was on that flight with Serena Blake. I was in first class, and I just want to say I didn't speak up. I saw it. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. And now everyone is talking about her power, her money, her company, but what I keep thinking about is the look in her eyes." The woman swallowed hard. She didn't look mad. She looked used to it. And that's the part that broke me. She looked like someone who's had to learn to smile through it just to get to her seat. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." The video ended. Serena stared at the screen. "Even silence can echo," Mia said gently. "Sometimes it just takes the right moment." Serena returned to the kitchen. Aunt Laverne had already packed her a small bag of homemade sweet bread, a container of her famous okra stew, and a folded photo of Serena as a little girl holding a book upside down in church. "Take this, in case you forget who you are, or who you were before they told you to be smaller." Serena kissed her cheek. "I won't forget." As she stepped outside, a child from the building across the street pointed and waved. His mother called out, "That your niece on the news?" Laverna waved back with pride. "That's my whole legacy right there." Serena smiled as the wind tugged gently at her coat. The city buzzed around her, but something inside her had quieted. Not because the fight was over, but because she finally knew what she was fighting for. The boardroom at Orion Global Headquarters had seen its fair share of high-stakes meetings. But today, it held a different kind of tension. Not financial, not even political. This was personal. It lingered in the air like static before a storm. Serena Blake stood at the head of the table. Her expression was calm, but her presence was undeniable. She wore no makeup today, no jewelry, just a navy blue pantsuit and a quiet fire in her eyes. On the screen behind her, 2 clips played side by side. One was surveillance footage of the flight attendant interaction. The other was the now viral video of the first-class passenger who had broken her silence. When both videos ended, the room remained silent. A few executives shifted in their chairs, others avoided eye contact. Serena let the silence stretch. She knew the discomfort was necessary. "We are not here to discuss damage control," she said softly. "We are here to confront our reflection, and it is long overdue." One of the senior partners, A man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a career spanning 3 decades, cleared his throat. "Serena, no one is doubting your experience, but freezing operations cost billions. Shouldn't we have taken a softer approach?" She turned toward him, not unkindly, but with clarity sharpened by years of restraint. "A softer approach is what we tried every time they mispronounced our names and told us to smile. A softer approach is what we tried every time we were mistaken for the assistant or the intern or the caterer. This time, we chose truth in its full volume." He looked away. Another board member, younger, Latina, leaned forward. "Serena, you've always said this company was about creating the future. I think you just made sure it looks different than the past." Serena gave a small nod. "What happened on that plane was not new. What was new was our refusal to fold into the comfort of silence." The door opened quietly. Mia Chen entered, holding a tablet. Her usual briskness was gentler now, tempered by the storm they had weathered together. "We just got confirmation. The FAA inquiry is closed, no penalties. And Serena, the Secretary of Transportation just sent over a statement. They're officially implementing the Sky Equity Act starting next quarter." A low murmur spread around the room. Sky Equity. Serena exhaled. "Yes. It requires every major airline to submit equity training protocols, real-time seat reassignment audits, and provide rapid response mechanisms when passengers report discrimination. It's the first national standard of its kind." Mia continued. "Also, we've had over 900 companies sign the Flight Fairness Pledge, including 5 major tech firms and 2 airline CEOs. Serena let herself smile, just slightly. "And public sentiment." Mia hesitated, "overwhelmingly supportive. Though some right-wing outlets are calling it an overreach, they're spinning it as corporate activism gone rogue." Serena turned back to the screen. She changed the image. Now showing was a graph. One side displayed hate incidents in air travel over the last decade. The other side showed response rates. The gap between those 2 lines was what silence looked like. That was no longer acceptable. She stepped back from the podium. "This isn't about revenge, it's about repair. But to repair, we have to first recognize who's been asked to carry the broken pieces for too long." One of the interns in the back, a young black woman with dreadlocks tied up in a neat bun, raised her hand timidly. "Ms. Blake, do you think it will actually change?" Serena looked at her. There was no easy answer. Change doesn't arrive in a single act. It arrives when enough moments pile up and we stop asking if our dignity is negotiable. What we did here is just one moment, but it's one they will remember. The meeting ended not with applause, but with quiet resolve. That was how Serena preferred it. Applause faded. Resolve built movements. Later that evening, she found herself in her office, alone. The city lights glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, cars weaved through the Manhattan streets like blood vessels pushing life into a restless body. She sat on the couch, her heels off, feet tucked beneath her. She opened the folder Mia had left on her desk earlier. It was titled Correspondence. Inside were printed letters, emails, and messages, some from people she knew, most from people she didn't. One stood out. It was written in crayon. "Dear Miss Serena, I saw you on TV. My dad said you were very brave. I want to be brave like you too. My name is Ava. I am 7. I like airplanes, but sometimes they are scary. You made them less scary." There was a small drawing below. A woman with curly hair sitting in an airplane seat with a big heart next to her. Serena held the paper to her chest. It wasn't the headlines that moved her. It was this, the quiet ripple. She closed her eyes, letting the stillness wash over her. A knock on the door. "Come in." It was Mia. "Thought you'd still be here," Mia said, handing her a mug of tea. "Ginger and mint. Just how you like it. Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, sipping slowly. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Mia asked quietly. Serena looked out the window. "Every day. And yet I remember what it felt like to be a girl watching someone else hold the line, even when the world tried to push them back." Mia nodded. "Then let's keep holding it." They clinked mugs gently. Outside, the city pulsed with life. A million strangers moving toward dreams, toward disappointment, toward tomorrow. But in this room, two women sat shoulder to shoulder, not to rest, but to ready themselves. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It sits quietly, waits, and then, when the world is just distracted enough, it rises. Serena Blake stood alone on the airport tarmac, her heels pressed into the concrete like she was anchoring herself to the earth. The jet behind her was sleek, black, and branded with the Orion Global emblem gold wings spread in upward flight, a symbol now known across the world. She had just returned from Washington, D.C., where she signed the final provisions of the Sky Equity Act into law. Her voice had echoed through the Capitol, not raised, not broken, simply steady. She had spoken for every person told to sit quietly, or every child forced to learn their worth secondhand. She had not spoken to be remembered. She had spoken so others would not be forgotten. As the wind rushed around her, she closed her eyes and listened, not to the sound of engines or distant chatter, but to the quiet inside herself. For the first time in years, it was still inside the terminal. Press waited, cameras, lights, questions. She had asked for just 5 minutes alone. No security, no aides, no interruptions. She needed to feel it, all of it, the journey, the bruises she had covered with smiles, the stares she had absorbed without blinking, the long nights she had worked twice as hard for half the respect, the day she was told to return to economy despite holding a platinum ticket in her name. Her name. She whispered it to herself like a vow. Serena Blake. A name they would remember now. Not for the company she built, not for the billions she moved, but for the boundary she refused to let them cross, for the dignity she would never again let them redefine. From behind, footsteps approached. Soft, intentional. It was Mia. "You ready?" she asked gently. Serena opened her eyes. "Not just yet." Mia handed her a phone. "I think you'll want to hear this." On the screen was a live feed from a classroom in Oakland. A group of second graders had gathered around a smartboard. Their teacher stood beside them, eyes shining. On the board was Serena's face from a news interview the week before. "Who knows who this is?" the teacher asked. One hand shot up. "That's Miss Blake. She's the one who told the airplane people that we belong to." The class clapped. The teacher nodded. "That's right. And today, we're going to draw our own airline posters, ones where every seat belongs to every color." Serena watched in silence as tiny hands reached for crayons and markers. One child drew a plane with a rainbow fuselage. Another wrote in block letters, "Every sky, every voice." She smiled softly. That smile was not for the cameras. It was not for validation. It was for them, and it was for the girl she used to be. The girl who once sat in a waiting room, watching white men walk past her into interviews she was told she was unqualified for. The girl who had to prove her humanity before she could pitch her brilliance. The girl who walked onto a plane holding a first-class ticket, only to be told she didn't look the part. She had never wanted to fight. She had only wanted to fly. But when they clipped her wings, she built her own jet. Now, that jet bore her name, and thousands of others had learned to soar with her. Mia glanced at her watch. The press is asking about your next move. Some think you'll run for office. Serena laughed quietly. Let them guess. Mystery keeps the vultures nervous. She turned toward the terminal. Before we go back in there, Serena said, I want to ask you something. Mia raised an eyebrow. Would you take over as interim COO? Mia blinked. Me, you've already been doing the work. You know the heart of this place better than anyone. I need someone who understands not just the business, but the responsibility. Mia looked down for a moment, then nodded. Then it would be an honor. They walked side by side toward the terminal doors. As they approached, cameras flashed, voices rose. Miss Blake, can you comment on the Sky Equity implementation timeline? Serena paused, her posture relaxed, her gaze direct. The timeline is already in motion. Every airline is being audited. Every training protocol is being redesigned. Every seat reassignment is now trackable and accountable. But the real question isn't when it happens. The question is whether we have the courage to keep it happening. Another journalist called out, Do you have a message for those who think this was about revenge? Serena leaned slightly forward. If your dignity feels like a threat to someone else, it was never about you. It was always about their comfort. Silence followed. She continued walking. At the top of the stairs to the press platform, she turned once more. I'll say this one last thing, and then I'll leave the microphone to the next voice rising behind me. This wasn't just a protest, it was a promise. We're not here to take your seat. We're here to build new wings, and the sky is wide enough for all of us. With that, she stepped down, not as a spectacle, but as a signal. The work would go on. Later that night, she returned home. The apartment was quiet. She poured herself a cup of tea and opened a small box she had kept hidden in her closet. Inside was her old business school application, the one she had rewritten 12 times because she had been told her tone was too assertive. She read the essay again. It ended with one line, I do not want power. I want presence. I want the world to feel different because I walk through it. She folded it carefully and placed it back in the box. Outside, the moon hung low, casting silver across her windows, and somewhere in the sky, a little girl on her first plane ride sat beside her mother, peeking through the oval window. She pointed. Mommy, look, that plane has a golden wing. Her mother smiled. That's the Serena jet. Baby, you know her story. The little girl nodded. She wasn't afraid to speak, even when they told her to sit down, and the mother held her closer. Exactly. That's how we fly now. They tried to silence her. They tried to shrink her presence to fit their comfort, but she didn't scream. She simply stood and let her truth speak louder than any voice ever could. Serena Blake didn't destroy the system. She exposed it. She didn't demand revenge. She demanded recognition. And in doing so, she became something more than a CEO. She became a symbol of what it means to rise without stepping on others, to lead with power and compassion. But behind Serena's story are thousands of untold moments. Every child told to sit down. Every parent afraid to speak up. Every quiet injustice that passes without consequence until someone dares to look it in the eye. Discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through rules and uniforms and fake apologies. Let Serena's story remind us dignity is not negotiable, and silence is not the same as peace. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. We tell stories that fight for justice, honor the unseen, and give voice to those who've been silenced, because the next story might just be yours. Stay with us. More is coming.